Hi, I'm Calvin Ball, your 2023 MACo president and Howard County executive, and you're listening to MACo's Conduit Street Podcast, the source for in-depth coverage of county news and notes from Annapolis.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. This is Michael Sanderson, and I'm glad to have with me today one of my colleagues from the MACo policy team, Sarah Sample. Sarah, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, glad you could make a little time to join this week. There's some of the stuff in your portfolio that has sort of taken front seat with MACo and with our members and this hot part of the legislative session. So I thought that you and I could walk through a few different things and catch up our listeners on a couple of these topics that are high priorities for MACo and for our member counties, but also just a few other things that are happening legislatively and practically for our members. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. So I mean, process-wise, folks who are familiar with this whole legislative process know we're in real crunch time with the legislative session. And we're actually like trying to squeeze in recording this in between floor sessions of the House and Senate. Today's Thursday, the 16th, and both chambers have been on the floor. They're coming back to the floor. They're hustling to move things along to get Senate bills out of the Senate and House bills out of the House in time for this big crossover date that's coming up soon. We know that a lot of final decisions are being made, a lot of bills are being adjusted and that sort of thing. So let's check in on a couple things in your subject areas. Your portfolio includes public health and public safety and some of our sort of legal and liability issues, a number of things like that tied together. On the public safety side, can we talk about body cameras? It's one of MACo's big initiatives for this session with body-worn cameras, principally for our law enforcement officers. We want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess before we dive in too much, just a quick recap to discuss where we are on it. Short and sweet, outline again for our listeners what the initiative entails to ground us a little. So the initiative is made up of two bills. One is a procurement bill for the technology, and the other deals with guidelines for release of the body-worn camera footage that is byproduct of the cameras, obviously. And it relates to the public information request for footage.
Right. Okay. So two separate bills, like one of them on the front end of getting the system set up and running and buying equipment and so forth. Yeah. And then another bill dealing with the back end. How do you manage all the footage that eventually piles up once you've equipped everyone with the body-worn cameras?
Exactly. And it's a lot of footage.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the first one. So the procurement one, this bill would centralize resources at the state level for procuring the cameras. And it's not just the cameras, it's the charging stations, it's storage capacity, redaction software, cybersecurity. I mean, this is a really big package that every county would need. So everyone has to get this stuff based on the mandate. And the bill is saying to avoid some of that mass redundancy of effort for such a big tech lift and to hopefully avoid some of the premiums that can come with single user contracts. We want them to be able to take part in the provisions that the state organizes for both their officers and our own, essentially.
Okay. So the lay of the land here, like the bigger context is the state has already said that all the county law enforcement agencies will need to have cameras on all their sort of public facing officers by the beginning of 2025. So we're working with the window of time before that mandate kicks in for everyone. And the idea with this bill is to have some central opportunity for the locals to kind of ride on, right? That's basically the idea.
Yeah, so the state handles the negotiation and the acquiring of the equipment that I just outlined, and then we get the option to take part in those contracts and provisions. We pay our part of the cost, but it's essentially subsidized with the other users because it's sort of a economies of scale element. And then it's administratively handled at the state level.
Right. And so I guess like a central contract with the State Department of General Services, you might get more favorable terms from a bidder if you have, the pledge that this might end up being 15 or 30 different units. If you end up with municipal agencies as well, you could end up with 30 different units right on the state contract. And so somebody might say, hey, it's worth it for me to come in and make like a good aggressive bid to try and get this contract, more so than just if, whatever, the Garrett County Sheriff ends up doing this by themselves, and that you don't necessarily, it's not a big juicy contract for someone to get. So that economies of scale idea makes sense. So okay, so that makes sense for, I'm thinking already of like the Garrett County Sheriff, an entity that doesn't right now have a camera program, but we know some of our jurisdictions already have launched cameras and have put cameras on many, if not all, of their forward-facing officers. So what about I guess so like there's three tiers here, right? So I guess there's three tiers here. If Garrett County wants to ride on the state contract, this might be a good deal for them. But if they don't and they want to do it themselves, they're still able to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so some counties have already done a great job taking the initiative where they have the capacity to do so with this. And they are welcome to stick with their existing provision. But if that changes in the future, then they can still opt in to ride on the state contract at some point if they deem that to be what they're looking to do. So it gives flexibility.
Okay. All right. So that makes sense. So who would be against this, right? This is an idea of let's do a central service, make it cheaper and easier for folks who have to do something complicated, give them a cheap and easy option. Like I would assume like nobody's showing up to say this is a bad idea, right?
No, we've pretty much passed the first round with flying colors. The only conversations that came up in the first round were technical in nature, but pretty much kept the intent fully intact. It's a bipartisan sponsorship line from leadership in the House and the Senate. It's really just, it's a practical good bill to help us get this unfunded mandate off the ground by 2025. And I think it shows some partnership at the state level. And I think that's really meaningful. And I think people see that. And that's why, it's moving along.
Okay. All right. So that sounds good. And I think we were optimistic that this would land well, especially, there was a joint legislative work group at body-worn cameras, and they sort of embraced interim, through a meeting saying this is the direction they wanted to go, not as big and broad as a sort of weightier bill from last year, but let's get the ball rolling in some organized way. It's easy to support something like that, and so I'm good to see that moving. All right,
definitely.
So and then like we're going to get the House bill presumably out of the House and Senate bill out of the Senate, and we think this should be smooth sailing, right?
Yeah. So I think once we get through crossover, I think it's going to be a little bit more of the same that I was just describing, because it's not seen as that controversial. So I think it'll be hopefully a smooth ride. The public information bill, though, that's part of the initiative, the second one in this initiative, it seems to spark a lot more conversation. So I think, that's more the one to focus on.
Right. So we know that bill's been in years past, and we run into snags here and there, but it's always felt to me like it's not that the central idea of what we're trying to do with the Public Information Act and this footage is itself really controversial, right? Like our real mission here is to try and have good, clean rules for what kind of information should not go out to the public, through the Public Information Act. You say, I want to see the footage and so forth. So that doesn't feel like it's a central controversy. So you say this bill is in a trickier spot. Like give me and our listeners a little flavor of where we are there.
Yeah, and I think so. That's the thing. I think people initially think of it as controversial, and I just don't really see it that way. I think it failed multiple years in a row, and so it starts to look like it could feel like it's controversial, and I think that's somewhat of a misleading characterization. So different versions of it failed, but those variations really do express the learning curve I think that we're seeing. It's a bill that's harder to understand. And honestly, I think the stalling of it in the past might even have set us up for it to pass this year, because it's given everyone more time to understand it. Because again, we're dealing with what is brand new and evolving technology and policy, and we have the benefit of other states that have been ahead of us on this.
Right. So, okay. So this one has a little more political intrigue and maybe some more process ahead. let's sort of back up a second, and before we get too deep into the second bill, just like set this up, what the bill is seeking to do. And we've got a Senate bill we're focusing on here, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So this is Senate Bill 40. And this is a bill that would create, like you sort of mentioned already, some guardrails for release of the footage. And essentially what we and all the other advocate stakeholders are asking for are a list of mandatory denials of certain types of footage on the grounds that they are simply too invasive from a privacy and a safety standpoint to be considered for public release. I think that language alone scares people, and maybe that's where the controversy comes up. But remember, we're rolling out hundreds of thousands of cameras into our communities in situations that are highly sensitive. And we are, as a government, choosing to do this. And it creates millions upon millions of hours of footage of the public in times of need and conflict. And so with that kind of technology, we need to make sure we are doing this responsibly and in the interest of the public.
Okay, so this bill is going to change the language of the Public Information Act. So that's basically like our sunshine laws. The federal level, people refer to it as the Freedom of Information Act, and Maryland has a slightly different name, but it's the same concept that like a document held by the government belongs to the people for the most part, but then that law is riddled with exceptions to that rule, saying, but these are things that you don't share with the public. You don't give out information about like a health condition that a public employee might have, even if you have records of it in some sort of a personnel file or a document that the government holds. You don't just share with the public, oh, this person has this condition. You just don't do stuff like that. So like, we're not breaking new ground with the philosophy of the Public Information Act. There's already like dozens of different segments of the state law that say, don't share this and don't reveal that, right?
Yeah, and I think we saw a little bit of that last year, because I mean, it sailed through the Senate with almost no conversation and with flying colors. So I mean, that is understood to a degree, but this is a dual sort of chamber process. But yeah, it was unanimously passed, and the Senate said stamp of approval, good bill. We aren't going to even mess with it. It's really the conversation that's just been held up when we get to the House Judiciary Committee. So initiative overall, both of these bills have passed from the Senate, good to go. Like I said before, the procurement bill, it's a bipartisan sponsorship from leadership. And so far little to discuss. So I think really it's going to be about the Senate Bill 40. And maybe let me actually jump into just go back a little bit, what exactly it does. So it would deny third-party access to footage that depicts a victim or information that could identify a victim of domestic violence, rape, sexual assault, and I think the last one is neglect. So it would deny access to footage that depicts also the death of a law enforcement officer. And then the last piece of it is that it would deny footage that does not result in anything happening of consequence. So like nothing was alleged, starting, straight from misconduct all the way down to a citation or temporary detainment. Nothing happened basically. So those are the major elements that we're trying to have those denials in place for.
So trying to give clear rules to say there's a list of things that people should not be able to receive through the Public Information Act. And it's this kind of sensitive stuff, right? I mean, if you have cameras that are on for big swaths of time when officers are doing their duty, they run into people, they're in people's homes, they're responding to like domestic violence calls and other things like that, where you naturally are going to pick up a lot of this stuff on the camera. It's going to be in the footage. And if you don't have a smart law like this, you either have this stuff is sometimes going to get redacted, or maybe someone makes a judgment that it gets redacted. This bill would say, here are the clear rules. Don't release this kind of stuff. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, right. And
okay. Yep. So then, so when we carve out and say an event that doesn't have like something spicy, right? I mean, this seems to me like the obvious branch in the road is that the footage that the public probably wants the most pressing access to would be when there was an incident, when someone has been hurt or killed in an incident that, like shot by a police officer, the sort of things that make the headlines and have us all terrified. So this bill doesn't mess with that kind of thing though, right?
No, exactly. So if you had a situation with a victim, but then there was a detention, there was a temporary detainment, that footage would be redacted and released. We're talking about this instance where it's just a victim and nothing of consequence is being alleged.
Okay, so all right, so that helps then. Like, honestly, what our custodians in the police departments and sheriff's offices are most concerned about is like the boring stuff, right?
Exactly.
And right, I mean, it's a weird way of putting it, but on the spicy stuff where there is potentially a public interest and there's something that's worthy of real scrutiny, and we need to know what the officer did and whether it was fair, that stuff's going to get out. What we're talking about is when someone walks in the door and says, I just want to see everything.
Exactly.
And that's the sort of,
Yeah, so it's redacted. That would be redacted and released because the behavior of the officer in any and all instances of consequence is deemed to be in the public interest. And that serves the intent of the original legislation. When you look at just victim footage, like the victims that are outlined in the bill, a third party that has zero material connection to the incident, and you're releasing it to someone in that situation, that's where you start to go down the road of wondering whether or not this is appropriate. And the process to actually redact and protect the victim's identity when nothing is being alleged is extensive and risky just in and of itself. And truthfully, I think understanding that has been part of this year-over-year sort of learning curve. And I'll start with, the ACLU's position alone. Depending on what state you're in and when cameras rolled out, their position has shifted and even been contradictory in some instances.
And I guess you can see how that might happen. Like a group like the ACLU, broadly speaking, is standing up for individuals' rights to privacy on a certain level, right? I mean, that's like a pretty fundamental tenet of civil liberties, is the kind of stuff that a wide open camera lens gathers when an officer comes into your home is like, you and your kids and the things that you own. And it's an intrusive thing. So you add this technology into law enforcement, and potentially, if you're worried about civil liberties, you ought to be worried about the kind of stuff this bill is targeting. At the same time, the ACLU has been allies along with people who want to see like maximum transparency for public officials and law enforcement officers. And so in theory, like access to this footage is a tool to promote public accountability, and that's their brand as well. So you can see how this happens, but I guess, the Maryland branch of the ACLU has been an important player in this policy debate, and they've been something of a moving target, you're saying.
Yeah, and I think so when you look at just the ACLU across the country, it can be looked at sort of as flip-flopping, but because of the way that their policies have evolved with this. But I think, again, that's where some of the controversy comes in when you characterize it that way, because they, along with the rest of us, are learning the costs and the benefits of this new technology that, like I said, captures millions of hours of footage in highly sensitive situations. So you want to provide access to public information, but at the same time, we need to be able to protect the public's right to privacy, especially if you are a victim. And this is it's not a paper document, which is what the original rules were made for. So similar to like a computer operating system, file types change, inputs change, and they evolve. And then that previous operating system sort of gets gummed up. It just doesn't work, and it needs to be updated to meet those new needs ultimately. And I think that's what ultimately the ACLU has been doing in different states. They're going through and they're saying, all this footage should be saved and available for request to anyone. And then it turned into, you need to be able to request footage with some degree of specificity. And then it turned into, I think that after 6 months, inconsequential footage could just be deleted because it's a little bit too surveillance naturey. And then you've got, like, it was 6 months in one instance, it was 3 years. But to my point about the ACLU's position evolving is that we've all been evolving with our understanding of the pitfalls that can be created with massive application of technology like this. We know there are brilliant people that work at the ACLU, but they're learning alongside of, the rest of us with this as it's sort of rolling out. But also, I think over the years, like I've said, this has been stalled. There have been multiple opportunities for learning curves from a bunch of different stakeholders, not just the ACLU.
So who else is in this mix, along with civil liberties advocates and sort of the local governments and law enforcement who run who run the cameras and run the systems and so forth. Who else is at the table on this kind of thing?
Well, so I think there's individuals who want to make sure that there's an appeals process for getting footage that a third party, believes has been withheld without cause. At one point, I think in the past there was, I don't remember which group it was, but there was an amendment to create an additional appeals process. But there is a sufficient process that's already in place. It is through, it goes through the ombudsman to mediate the request first, and then I think it goes up to the compliance board, I think it's Maryland, Public Information Act Compliance Board. And then from there, it goes to the circuit court. So it's adding an additional process creates a potential for competing decision and confusion. But I think that was an amendment that was added without a full understanding of what the existing process looked like. And honestly, I think some of that is just the nature of being in session and everything's going so fast and so crazy. And those little details can be missed.
That's definitely a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that we've learned a ton about is like, what it actually takes to redact and release victim footage. Because remember, the PIA was written for the paper document, like a couple black boxes, and then you carry on and you're able to release the information.
Right, you magic marker out the person's name and you're done, right?
Yeah, this is not that at all. And so when you're trying to protect a victim's identity and location on footage, where do I begin with that?
Right. And so in the event that, I just feel like you mentioned victims a couple of times, and we're talking about redaction, but in the event that like a person with a specific stake in seeing video footage, like the victim themselves, if that person is asking for footage, they're not getting like the redacted, trimmed back version. They would get the raw stuff, right?
Oh yeah, of course. They get that footage completely unredacted. The scenario we're protecting the public from is a large sort of sweeping request of a bunch of footage that might have victims on it, not in connection to the victim. So, and just to walk you through it, so in order to process something like this, I just want to put you in the position of the custodian. So let's say a domestic violence victim, they call for help. Officer's camera is turned on when they pull up to the house, video recording starts. And remember, we need to delete anything identifying the individual or the location. So immediately that camera that's been turned on is looking at street signs, houses down that road, and you turn towards the house, you could see cars with license plate numbers, you could see mailboxes, you could see the house number.
Yeah.
And then you go into the house and it's like, it could be it could be a piece of mail, it could be a picture on the wall, it could be a computer screen, it could be a college sweatshirt. And and that's not even, we haven't even gotten to the individual yet. It could be, blur out their face, but it could be tattoos. It could be birthmarks. It could be a handicap. It really it's overwhelming when you start to think about what they're trying to actually eliminate from that footage, which is not a document.
I'm trying to imagine like being a person, like, you're a paralegal or a staff attorney who's working for a law enforcement agency, and you've got this, I got these 6 hours of footage that's been requested. So I need to go through this like frame by frame. I can just imagine being that person, like beady little eyes squinting and sort of like playing one of these like find the difference game, like photo hunt or whatever.
That's exactly it. That's
right. Exactly. But like that's a totally different ball game than going through a letter and you magic marker over a person's name and a reference to a place, and then you're done with the whole thing. Like that's a 8-minute process. This is like frame by frame, like granular level.
Yeah. And that's the point that we're trying to make here is this is not a piece of paper. This is a completely different thing. And something you can do your best, but something could be missed. And custodians in Maryland, they're personally liable for a mistake in these situations. So it's risky for everyone involved. And for what cause if there's nothing being alleged, not even a temporary detainment or a citation. So some of the things that we listed in that bill, because this is the process where you have a custodian, you have officers and lawyers all watching this footage multiple times. And then you look at the number of things that need to be caught and blurred. You really start to ask yourself, like, what are we doing here? This is a victim's personal incident where no conduct issue has been raised, and it would be released ultimately to someone with no connection to the victim at all. And I think this is where the benefits of technology start to spin into, that privacy violation issue.
Right. So like officer accountability and protecting information about protecting the identity of victims and this sort of sensitive stuff is like centerpiece public policy, but then there's like boring stuff here too. I mean, I can't help. I mean, I cut my teeth as a fiscal guy, so I tend to think of dollars and cents here. But like everything you're describing, hiring that staff person to go frame by frame and do all this, like this is going to rack up a bunch of cash. It's going to be an expensive process.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, this is taxpayer dollars too. Into the 5 and 6 digits. I mean, and that could even be for one big request alone. So the guardrails would help, us get the police reform legislation to a place where it fulfills its intent with the privacy violation, without the privacy violations, without an, effective surveillance state, and without the redaction costs like we just described. I mean, I think in Seattle, Washington, I think it was, there was one request of no consequence completely dwarfed the entire annual operating budget for the whole redaction program. Things like that make it so misconduct requests, like where something is alleged and something did go wrong, those can get backlogged. They're just going to end up sitting in the system when we've got some of these bigger sort of potential fishing expeditions going on.
Right, and that's not a sexy part of the bill, but like the nuts and bolts and the fiscal effects and staff time and what it might turn into as a to fulfill this request, it's going to cost you as the requester X dollars. I mean, all of that it's a meaningful part of this policy to have to balance. I recall also that in previous debates over this bill, when we've had back and forth as opposed to just simple support, when we've had back and forth over this bill, sometimes we get pressed like, well, have we had a nightmare here in Maryland yet? We have some agencies are wearing cameras. Do you have a victim you can put on your panel who can say, oh, this is what happened to me and it was terrible because Maryland laws are a nightmare? I mean, you sometimes get put on the spot, right? Well, where's your nightmare? How did this go wrong already in Maryland? What's the problem we're solving?
Yeah, and I can see that is a valuable argument in other circumstances. But and I think in terms of the actual examples, the victims advocates, they do have those examples, but I almost don't even want to go down that road if it's not a problem yet with something like this, because the truth is that it has happened. But I think that's sort of besides the point, because we are subjecting the entire public to these cameras and these new regulations. It shouldn't take a gross violation of someone's safety and privacy in their time of need to put these guardrails in place. And, and this would be a violation that would be made by the people they were asking to help them when they needed it most. And completely by mistake, because the process is risky as we just described it. So, I mean, the government is subjecting the public to this. We should recognize that it can happen, and we should be protecting them in that situation. It's a uniquely sensitive situation rather than just looking for something, that, went wrong. And so we need to legislate it now. That's very reactionary. We're trying to be proactive about something that we are subjecting the public to.
Right. Well, we think there's a problem in this policy today. Let's not wait for the nightmare to then react to that and say, oh yeah, you were right all along. Right. Let's fix the problem in it. Let's fix the weakness in the public policy in advance of there being a terrible crisis. Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing I had pointed out to somebody else recently about this is some of the types of crimes that we're talking about in this bill have historically low reporting rates. And so you now have this opportunity where this footage could get out, and we have examples where this footage could get out and harm a victim. And it's like, well, those reporting rates are certainly not going to go up if, someone's calling for help and this could happen.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, you can see why a group like MACo, who advocates for victims' rights and particularly for sufferers of sexual abuse, are saying this is an important bill. We want the law to be crystal clear.
Yeah.
Don't let this footage get out. Don't give our victims, the people we're advocating for, anything more to be worried about than the real crisis they're facing in their lives. And I mean, I got sympathy for that.
Definitely. Yeah. So there's a lot to consider. But I think this is the case with new technology and new laws. And ultimately, I think the stakeholders have created a really great bill over the last couple of years, and we really should be able to be proud of that. This is due diligence that is required of all of us. And so I'm hopeful that this is the year to get it over the finish line. And actually, when it comes to new technology, I got to watch a really wonderful example of this a couple of days ago in a work group. I think Delegate Moon was leading a work group with all stakeholders. I think it was on what was it? Oh, I was surveillance technology being used in criminal investigation. So again, relatively new technology. We're subjecting the public to it, and I thought Delegate Moon did a great job as sort of the judicious arbiter in the situation. He said very clearly, we're going to listen to everyone and give everyone something that they can work with. Now, and don't get me wrong, it wasn't like you get a car and you get a car. It was more like you get a tire and like you get a steering wheel. There might be an axle in there somewhere in a seat, And at the end of the day, we didn't have a Maserati, but we had a used Honda Civic. It works, it's reliable, it gets us from point A to point B. And I mean, truthfully, I think that's the anatomy of a good bill. And that's the anatomy of the Senate Bill 40. It's just that, victims are protected, the officers are protected, the public interest is protected, the taxpayer dollars are protected. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, residents know we're managing the technology responsibly, I think.
All right. Well, selling me that a MACo initiative is a good idea shouldn't be that hard, but I think you just made a really good case to bring all this together. A number of boxes are being checked by this bill. It's a good bill out of the Senate. The action apparently is going to be in the House, and we knew that was going to be the lay of the land. So we've got a few weeks for Senate bills to get their day in the sun in the House. And this ought to be one that's worth watching. So I'll be circling that hearing date, and I think we'll have a number of people prepared to show up and talk about this as a good idea. So I mean, as we talk about police issues and law enforcement writ large, I don't want to get super, super deep, but I know there have been a number of other bills introduced dealing with police issues in one way or another. We know 2021 was sort of a landmark year in Maryland for big, broad police reforms. A few other odds and ends have come in this year. Any update there or meaningful stuff that's been happening or maybe not happening so far?
I think the big takeaway right now is that we're waiting to see on some of them. There haven't been a whole bunch of them. There's been some bills trying to make adjustments to the public or the Police Accountability Board, their authority. There's been, I know that MML has their initiative, which is for the municipalities to also be able to have police accountability boards and administrative charging committees. So there's things like that. The Attorney General also has, I think that's the Independent Investigations Division to have prosecutorial power over the cases that fall in their jurisdiction, which would be death at the hands of an officer or injuries likely to lead to death. But so there are other bills out there. It's a little too early to tell what's going to happen with those, because I think, we're on year 5 or 6 on police reform. And I think there's just a little bit of fatigue about messing with what we have in place right now without really seeing what works.
Right. Okay. So I think that, the independent investigation and the sort of AG's process, I believe that bill's passed the Senate. I think I remember the Senate debating that bill. So partial process on a couple of these things, but not a clear wave of we're gonna reinvent this whole cycle of bills and rewrite half the stuff from 2021. That does not seem to be the order of the day.
No, not right now at least. But we're gonna obviously keep an eye on it.
Okay. All right, and so one bill so you mentioned investigatory powers of the local police accountability boards, right? And that's that's one bill that MACo took a position on. Again, I don't want to go super deep, but you want to talk about that for a second? What are we talking about there? We set up the police accountability board in each county. That was a creation from the 2021 bill, and everything had to be up and running this past summer. So all the counties have these boards, assembled and populated and so forth. But the idea was to give them the ability, if you wanted, to let them have their own sort of investigation arm. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. But that's not a new concept as far as the structure of the existing sort of protocol, the Police Accountability Board and the Administrative Charging Committee. As of right now, with the previous legislation that had passed, the Administrative Charging Committee, they have the investigatory power. They have the ability to request documents and subpoena individuals. So that ability exists in the process. What this new law would do is also give the Police Accountability Board that ability. So the information comes into the PAB. They typically right now would send it to the law enforcement agency to investigate it. And then the investigation from the law enforcement agency would go out to the administrative charging committee. And then that's when the civilian oversight investigation really starts to happen, is in conjunction with what the law enforcement agency was able to put together on the incident. This law would say the PAB can also do that in conjunction with the law enforcement agency that's doing the investigation. So it sort of bookends the law enforcement agency with civilian investigatory power.
Right. I think that like that last point has to be the real the go-to element here is introducing civilian components to this process to either coexist with, or in some cases replace, what would be internal actions by the law enforcement agency. So I mean, I guess that's the idea, is policymakers are grappling with, to what extent, what parts of this process should you hand to a separate civilian entity, as opposed to having the police department look into the practices or an event that happened within and around the officers of that department, right?
Yeah, and I think the other good thing to add that, we, as MACo counties liked about this bill, is that it didn't require you to give them the investigatory power. It enabled us with the option to allow the Police Accountability Board to do that if in your particular jurisdiction you thought that was a necessary step. So it was just another tool in the process to give us sort of flexibility.
Right. So generally speaking, MACo stands up and says, giving us a local option and more flexibility locally, we're pro local flexibility. I mean, definitely. There are exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, that's the sort of thing that we stand up and say, hey, that way, if Allegheny wants this, but Washington County doesn't, then this lets you each do what you want to do. So like, that's the sort of thing that we tend to get behind. So you mentioned a handful of other bills. Anything else that you want to sort of mention on a status update? I know it's a little quirky trying to do this literally days before crossover, because things are in flux, and something that hadn't moved this morning could be all the way out of its chamber by tomorrow morning. But anything else you want to give a quick status update on?
Let me see. So we've got, as far as the reform ones go, the one, there's a patterns and practice bill from the Attorney General's office. That's SB 658, but that's one where it hasn't received a vote yet. So that's the situation with a lot of these. They're sitting there and we don't know what's going to happen. So it's the pattern and practice Attorney General's bill, the Attorney General's bill for investigatory powers or prosecutorial powers for their investigative division as it relates to police reform. And then there's the municipalities trying to get police accountability boards and administrative charging committees rather than just relying on the county's process. And then the one that we just discussed. So it's those four, but there's not a lot of movement yet. We're still waiting for votes on at least 3 of those first round votes.
Yeah. So I think if you're keeping score at home, probably the most important takeaway is it doesn't look like Maryland is doing a broad, really aggressive rethinking of the 2021 structure. It's more, how do we refine and tinker and maybe improve small elements of the structure that we've set up? And if we need to change the lines of authority here or there, maybe you do that. If you change who does the investigation or who does the prosecution or some other things like that, that's the kind of stuff they're dealing with. And that's kind of to be expected. You write that big body of law just a couple of years ago. We're early in implementation, but no surprise when the counties filed their report on how things are going locally, some of them said, this seems to be a problem. This doesn't seem like it's constructed ideally. Maybe we should look at it. So that's probably going to be the next couple of years cycle, I would think. Right?
Yeah. And that way, when you're able to look at it sort of from that bird's eye view of having a few years under your belt, you can make more comprehensive adjustments. If you're doing it year over year for things that pop up that may or may not be relevant in other jurisdictions, then you're adding more work each time it evolves, or each time you learn something new, rather than letting it take its course and then doing sort of a macro level approach to it after year 2 or 3.
Right. Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit, and public safety is one of those topics that there's almost always something happening in the legislative process. We know that public health, another part of your policy portfolio, and another important part of the mission for county governments is to tend to and support the health of our residents. Public health is a big issue, and even during a pandemic, where the last few years the big headline grabber has been the coronavirus and what to do about trying to maintain people's safety and best practices in the midst of a health pandemic, we know that we've also had this continuing crisis with opioid misuse and overuse. We've lost an awful lot of Marylanders and many Americans through overdoses and use of opioid and related medications. So that hasn't gone away, even during the crisis when most folks seem to have focused their public health attention on wearing masks and all those sorts of things. But the opioid crisis is still very much with us. I put an item that I thought was just I saw this little item on, I put a piece on the blog that I thought was sort of quirky, that Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I guess Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, would put out vending machines with Narcan, the medicine that can save somebody who's in active overdose. You give them a puff of Narcan, and potentially it could be like immediate restoration of their capacity, like they can just spring back to life almost.
That's what happens.
Yeah, a few years ago, this was you had to have a prescription. You had to have a medical professional prescribe the medicine to you. And now, I think the world has caught up and said, why should we restrict the use? It's easy to use. It's not something you can overuse or mess up with. So let's get Narcan in the hands of lots of people and have lots of people just carrying it around in their purse. So Milwaukee's going one step further and saying, hey, at facilities where people are congregating and they're going to be around, let's stick it in a vending machine. You come punch a button, you get a dose of Narcan, run down the hallway and save someone's life. Let's do that.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, especially as the crisis has evolved with fentanyl, which is significantly more powerful than some of the previous drugs. I mean, having those overdose reversal drugs readily available is key to saving lives for sure.
So that being sort of an interesting little twist in that, but I did note that the way Milwaukee County was doing that was by use of funds they got through a settlement with some of the companies who have made a lot of money, generating and selling and distributing all these various medications that so many of our American friends have gotten themselves addicted to and misused and even suffered from. So the issue of these financial settlements with the players who sort of caused and accelerated this problem is a live issue here in Maryland. So can you catch us up a little bit on sort of where we are with settlement funds getting to the front lines so we can continue our work to fight this crisis?
Yeah. Well, definitely. Yeah. So these are settlements that are sort of coming in waves as litigation continues with the companies that you're sort of just discussing. And the companies have varying levels and types of culpability in this process. And I think that's why it's continuing to drag out, because each situation is a little bit different. But essentially there's a national settlement that is made with that company. And then that goes down to the states via the Attorney General's office. And then counties sign on to a distribution agreement with the Office of the Attorney General, and then the funds flow through to the localities. Not all of it. Some of it goes to the state, and some of it then comes down to the localities. So this could be municipalities that are included, but for counties, 23 of the 24 jurisdictions have signed on to the national settlement guidelines and will be receiving funds. I think the first round of settlement funding started to come through at the end of last year from a handful of them. It was Johnson and Johnson, which is a manufacturer, and then it was distributors, McKesson, Cardinal Health, and I think there was one more. But so the first round accounted for a total of, I want to say it was $395 million over 18 years that was coming to Maryland. So for a county like Frederick, let's say, they'll receive $11 million over 18 years for that settlement.
Right. So there tends to be sort of a sticker shock when you hear a number like $395 million coming to Maryland. Yeah. It makes it sound like, oh my gosh, like the coffers are going to be overflowing and we're going to have so many resources to help people who are in need, and we'll be able to set up a bunch of residential beds for treatment and so forth. But then you
Yeah.
break, 18-year period is a long stretch of time. And when you divide this among literally every single jurisdiction in Maryland, including our municipal friends, have faced burdens from this. So that pie is getting sliced into lots of slices. That,
Oh, yeah.
less than $1 million a year to a medium to large sized county like Frederick County,
Mhm.
it's helpful, but that's not exactly like, game over. Like we're going to win this fight now that we have these dollars.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things to be aware of with that is that, we're hearing a lot right now about various opioid remediation projects and mental and behavioral health programs. And, these are programs that are hoping to use these funds. And so there's talk about it going to educational programs, to medication assisted treatment in the jails, and in the communities. I mean, so there's a lot of people that are looking to use that funding. And then by the time it gets down to localities, it's just not that much.
Right. It's a natural process, right? The word gets out that there's a new funding stream available to help target like needs in the community. This isn't pennies for heaven for nothing at all. But the idea that, there's funding available to expand and improve our response to the opioid crisis. And, by the time Frederick gets that share of their funds, they've probably got it spoken for 7 times over, because there are so many different needs or ideas about what you could do with, $700,000 or something.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, the opioid crisis created problems, that we're going to be dealing with for a long time. And that's also a problem that's going to continue evolving. I think, what was it? It was House Bill 571. I think it was, not 571. It was one of the House bills. It was helping overdose treatment centers get more powerful overdose reversal drugs. So essentially, the overdose reversal medicine, similar to the Narcan and the vending machines that you're just talking about, in their existing dosage amounts, are sort of being rendered ineffective by the influx of fentanyl, which is just significantly more powerful than we were previously seeing. So now the treatment and the overdose medicines have to adjust, and this is really expensive stuff. I mean, these are medications. So, and that's just rapidly evolving.
Yeah, I mean, fentanyl obviously is just a game changer for this fight. I mean, several years ago, before I'd ever even heard of fentanyl as a thing, before it started becoming, it's heroin laced with fentanyl or other drugs that are, that have traces amount of fentanyl, and it increases their power and effectiveness and whatever. It gets people higher or whatever. It also means that the remedies need to be more powerful, and it's hard to keep up. So you said that there's like a wave of settlements, like sort of some in the bag and some on the way for a subsequent round. So what are the next steps there?
So the next steps, so we don't have the numbers yet to really break it down the way we just did from the first round, where it was 395 million over 8 years. 11 million of that goes to Frederick, and then that's a little less than $1 million a year over that period of time. We don't have that type of a breakdown yet for the second wave. What we know right now is that the Attorney General has come to counties and said the next round is on its way. We all have to reconfirm our willingness to participate in the settlement. And then I think this next round is going to include Teva Pharmaceuticals. And there's, I think, 3 other companies. I know Walmart and Walgreens were also in this round. But the preliminary estimates, I remember for Walgreens nationwide was 5 billion. But that, again, at the top level, that number looks big. But by the time it gets down, it's significantly smaller. So we know it's coming. We're in contact with the Attorney General's office and with all the jurisdictions that are signing on to the settlement. And hopefully we'll know more soon.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess in big picture, it's good that we in Maryland have worked out sort of an orderly way of doing this. So, with Attorney General Frosch, when he was in office, we sort of went through a bunch of negotiations with our colleagues and friends at the Municipal League and with the State Department of Health and the AG's office, kind of ironed out this whole mechanism to say, well, you could distribute the funds based on these different components, and it's a way to measure how much your community has borne the brunt of this crisis. Yeah. And that's not a perfect process, but I think it's good to have gone through something like that, so you don't need to have like an interjurisdictional battle for every new every new iteration. If this is going to be 4 waves of separate settlements, let's not reinvent the wheel. Like we've kind of got a template already. So
and with the urgency of the problem, like that is absolutely how it has to be done, I would say.
Right. I got to say, I think that the state's special secretary for opioid response, Emily Keller, a former mayor of Hagerstown, and among the people who was part of like working out that whole framework, I got to think that she'll be in high demand at MACo's summer conference. We'll be getting together, leaders and opinion makers from county government and from state government and all around. And like, this is the kind of topic that is very high in mind and forward in the thoughts of our county leaders. So I think, we have a session talking about what's happening with these settlements and where are your partnerships and what's the next thing you ought to be doing to serve your community. I think we'll fill up a room with that kind of topic.
Yeah, definitely. No question.
All right. So that's a pretty good rundown of another timely topic for us. And the opioid settlement is, settlements and the waves thereof is a pretty big deal. All right, so we're getting up to crossover. This is your first session with the MACo policy team. You have any like thoughts or reflections? This may have been the calmest hour of your week, just chatting on the microphone with me. Any thoughts about how things are going?
Oh, it's such a loaded question. Everything is happening so fast that you almost don't have time to really even like absorb it fully until like you get a little bit of space from it. But I guess generally, the personalities, the diversity in personalities is amazing. I come from the entertainment world. I was as at Live Nation for 8 years. And so I've seen a lot of different personalities, like no question, but this is just a completely different type of education and psychology. And I love it. I think it's awesome. The people are so unique and just come from completely different backgrounds. And so it's pretty fascinating. But what else? I guess mad respect for the people who do this work. You're operating on such a tight timeline. The hours are incredibly long. The priorities are just innumerable. Meetings go late into the evenings. They start well before business hours the next day. It's just such unique constraints. What other environment even operates like this? And like no one's getting enough sleep or drinking enough water or getting their steps in, but everyone's still plugging away. And that's what's odd. The purpose and determination, it's really it's awesome to see. It's like, it's a superhuman lift. And I know you'd mentioned it a lot before we even got into session. Like I could not have fully understood it until you're actually doing it and taking part in it. And I think it's pretty amazing what everyone is accomplishing on a timeline like this. It's wild. But that's more like the external look. Like, when I think of, like from the MACo perspective, like we have our internal process with the legislative committee where, every single jurisdiction is represented and it's admirable. You've got all the Republicans and the Democrats coming together and they listen to each other. And it gets tough at times, but they're collaborating and voting on positions and sticking with our common goals as a team. And where else is that happening in politics? Civil discourse and common goals, like for the win. That's really great to be a part of. I'm really enjoying that piece of it too.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to be said for that, and I know you and your colleagues who are actually in the trenches doing the policy work for MACo, testifying almost every day, through these crunch time, these last 6 weeks or so of session. That is its own grind. But it doesn't work at our level without all the people, like you send a copy of a bill to a county attorney to give a review. Hey, is this going to interfere with, the way you're doing things in your jurisdiction? Or, the health departments are concerned about, we don't think we can implement the bill the way this is written, but we could rewrite it. We could probably fix this and solve this.
Yeah.
Every one of those efforts is a lift. And like you said, it just comes in such rapid fire sequence that it doesn't seem possible that as much can get done as does get done. And not everything ends up with a perfect happy ending, and we end up with weird compromises and things like that. But this time of year, it is amazing the amount of time that so many people put into this to come out with the best products we can. So I don't know, it's one of a kind. I agree with you. There's no way to talk to somebody in November and have the person understand what session is going to be. You just have to it's throwing the baby into the pool, right?
And I'm one of those people, I just want to be able to prepare as much as possible. And it's there was that you just got to go through it to get it. Really. And you kept saying that, and I'm like, all right. So, but the instincts come, like you start to it's been pretty awesome.
Good. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the team. Enjoyed working with you through this session, and we got big things ahead. We got, I forgot how we're at 25 days of session. Does that sound about right? Nice. Anyway, we're down to the last 4 weeks of session. This next week will be insane. Then things will cool off a little bit, and then the last week we'll have a short list of things, and it'll be like hair on fire for whatever's left on your list for every stakeholder in town. So everybody can buckle up. It'll be fun. So
game on.
That's right. That's where we are. So friends, let's wrap things up for this walk down Conduit Street. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe. And that way, all the episodes will be delivered directly to the device of your choice. And feel free to just smash that 5-star review. That's the way you can tell all your friends about this little thing we have going on here. With that, you can also follow along on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and of course, watch for the Conduit Street blog. So for Sarah Sample, this is Michael Sanderson signing off, and we will talk to you soon.